Good morning and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Make UK and PwC. Today we're discussing the Executive Survey 2025. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. All attendees are in listening mode only, and only the panelists have video and audio available. If you wish to engage with the panelists by asking a question or leaving a comment, you can do so by typing into the Q&A box in the Zoom control bar on your screen. We'll be moderating those questions, and we have time reserved at the end of the webinar for response. We are not using the chat button. And finally, today's webinar is being recorded, and all questions sent in will be saved as part of the webinar transcript. I'm pleased now to introduce you to our chair, Peter Foster, Public Policy Editor at the FT. Peter.
Thanks, Caroline. Morning, everybody. Welcome to the Executive Survey Webinar 2025. We're going to do 10 or 15 minutes chat, and then we're going to have a Q&A, and I will take you all through that. Fingers on the buzzers for questions. From about 11:40, we will have questions, and we now have, I think, our complete panel. Because Liam Byrne has joined us. Liam Byrne MP, who's chair of the Business and Trade Select Committee, previously lost in the Palace of Westminster, but arrived in the nick of time to help us. We're going to open with 10 minutes of slides or so from Verity Davidge of Make UK, who's going to just talk us through the findings of the survey, which I reported on a week or so ago, and I think are genuinely interesting. Then we're going to hear some thoughts from Cara Haffey, who's a partner at PwC, on what the findings tell us and what might be ahead for 2025. Then we're going to hear from Liam and maybe get a little sense of how all this is going to play into what we hope is going to be the growth story of the next 3 or 4 years. And then we've also got two Make UK members, two executives who will give us the view from the front line. Claire Umney, who is the managing director of Alwayse Engineering, which is a Birmingham-based company. She's going to explain to you what it does. It makes clever wheelie things, I think, is the best I've got, including for a turtle. Clever wheelie things in Birmingham, and they export to about 70 countries. And we've also got Alex Hodges, another exporter. He is the chief executive officer of Vernacare, which is an American company. I think an American company, Alex, American company that exports to 65 different countries and does medical products. Biggest customer in the UK is the NHS. Right, without further ado, we're going to go to Verity and the slides. She's going to take us through the findings of the survey.
Brilliant. Thanks, Peter, and welcome everyone. I'm just going to do a very brief run through of some of the findings, and then we're going to go over to our expert panelists who are going to discuss them in a little bit more detail. So, Executive Survey 2025. This is always my favourite Make UK report. Of course, you think I'm going to say that, but it outright asks manufacturers about the risks and opportunities for the year ahead. And of course, we have a brand new government, so it was always going to be exciting to find out what kind of changes that may lead to. So, firstly, 2025 is actually going to see manufacturers hit with quite a wave of costs, but fear not, they are telling us they have plans underway to mitigate the impact. And it'll be interesting to hear later from our manufacturers on the call what their plans to offset these costs are. So if we look at these, at the top of that list is, of course, employment costs, with over 90% of employers expecting these to increase this year. And this is through the combination of the NICS increase and the reduction in the NICS threshold, but also the increases to the national living wage, which for manufacturing can have quite significant impacts because they have to maintain the pay differential. So it's the kind of knock-on consequences. And also potentially some of the additional costs associated with the Employment Rights Bill. Now, while parts of that bill, such as the changes to unfair dismissal, which is very much on manufacturers' minds at the moment, may not come until autumn next year, there are elements like having statutory sick pay from day one that we could see as early as autumn this year. So, of course, those employment costs are set to increase. Energy costs, again, still very much on employers' minds. And while we aren't facing the kind of the sky-high prices that perhaps we saw in 2022, they are still way above those pre-crisis levels. For the first time, we see what we call other taxes enter the top 3, and this probably captures some of the concerns around changes to inheritance tax. So many manufacturers are defined as family-run businesses, and therefore they'll be concerned about what those changes mean to them. And then there are, of course, a range of other costs which arguably are outside manufacturers' control, such as business rates, materials and logistics, and transportation. That said, we are seeing some increase in costs that we perhaps could deem as a positive. For example, marketing costs, which are associated with some of the growth strategies that we'll come on to later, and also the investment in training, so commitments to upskill and reskill the workforce and hopefully recruit some much needed apprentices. Now, as I mentioned, actually companies do have plans in place to offset, and the top of that list, 70% of firms plan to actually pass on those costs to the customer. I think we perhaps were a little bit surprised by that, as it felt like after kind of years of passing on costs such as energy, it may have kind of peaked. That said, quite closely behind is this renewed focus on productivity improvements, and somewhat linked to that is the 31% of companies who are actually planning to increase investment in automation. And this is often a natural response to increased labour costs as firms look to replace kind of certain tasks with automation. Now, this inevitably will lead to some potential loss of these job roles, but simultaneously can actually create kind of higher level and therefore higher paid roles. And as companies look to reduce their energy bills, we see the continued focus on energy efficiency improvements. But manufacturers also have growth opportunities, and actually they're stronger than ever. So they are seeing those potential challenges and thinking, what are the opportunities associated with the year ahead? And a major part of this growth strategy will, of course, be cost control, which is why we also see actions such as freezing recruitment, really kind of strict headcounts, for example. But they're also looking to launch new products and services and export into new markets. And again, it'd be interesting to hear later to see what those markets that manufacturers are looking at. There remains a focus on investing in capital equipment, hopefully taking advantage of some of the schemes that we have from the annual investment allowance and permanent full expensing. And companies are now looking to things like AI, again, driven by that need to kind of really drive productivity gains. And despite facing a year of costs, manufacturers do plan to spend the money that they do have in their pockets to invest in products, promotion and people. So about 63% plan to invest in new product development, and this is kind of complemented with this investment in brand development and marketing. And the need to fill job roles that are both new and existing to the company sees a focus on upskilling and retraining staff. Now, personally for me, it's taken quite a hit, the apprenticeship number. Only 30% of companies saying that they plan to invest in apprenticeships this year. Asked me that a few years ago, that figure would be about 80%, but that's likely a reflection of actually the challenges of the wider skills system. It's one of the main reasons that Make UK has recently launched our Industrial Strategy Skills Commission to actually reverse that downward trend that we have seen in apprenticeships. Now, speaking of industrial strategy, this is where we perhaps see a game changer in 2025. So Make UK has long called for an industrial strategy, so we've very much welcomed the government's commitment for one. We've seen the introduction of Industrial Strategy Council, and importantly being put on a statutory footing, and the launch of the Industrial Strategy Green Paper. And our exec survey shows that this strategy is very much a step in the right direction, but if we're honest, there are some gaps in sort of tangible outcomes and direct benefits. So 57% of companies agree that actually a long-term industrial strategy will increase their plans for investment. And this is much needed, I think, positivity against the backdrop of the challenges we saw from the autumn budget. And 43% agree that it will solve the long-term weak productivity challenge in the UK, so feeling pretty optimistic there. So if we can combine and align the industrial strategy with companies' plans to focus on productivity improvements, perhaps we might close that gap once and for all. However, there remains a little bit more kind of scepticism on whether it will directly kind of solve companies' problems, particularly in terms of securing skills. And from Make UK's perspective, I think that's where the Green Paper sort of really lacked. So we'll be looking for a lot more detail from that in the kind of late spring in government terms on whether skills is upfront and centre in sector plans. But the opportunities keep the optimism going. And despite a year of pretty hefty cost pressures, I think we can all agree, for the most part, manufacturers say that the opportunities actually outweigh the risks. And the UK is seen as a competitive location for manufacturing. But it could be, and I think we can all agree, an even more competitive place if we actually saw government focus on policies that stimulate growth in 2025. And for my final slide, I will just have a look at what companies are telling us they think those should be. So at the top of the list, and cited by half of respondents, is reforming the business rate system. And this has been a Labour government commitment, but we haven't really seen any action yet. Now, for manufacturing, it's really important because actually our sector pays about 4 times the average on business rates, and it can be a huge deterrent to companies to expanding their sites or investing in things like energy efficiency improvements. And just behind that are further details on the industrial strategy, which, as I mentioned, we expect to come in late spring. And then there are other kind of long-term measures, such as commitment on infrastructure, which again is all about providing certainty and stability, which has been what the industry has been asking. And of course, we're going to ask for a little something in return, and we've got some requests for support, support to drive the decarbonisation agenda, support to really accelerate digitalisation so that we can enhance that productivity, and of course, some support for companies that now need to navigate quite a minefield of new employment rights policies. So there you have it, a quick overview of the findings, and I look forward to hearing the insights from my fellow panellists. Thank you.
Expertly done, Verity. Thank you very much. Cara, we're going to start with you. As Verity was saying, the government's promised this industrial strategy. Still waiting for quite a lot of detail. Budgets are tight. I wonder what's your sense of the urgency, and how effectively do you think it can meet some of those expectations among manufacturers? Quite high expectations, actually, that Verity outlined in her presentation.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Peter, and thank you, Verity. That was, as usually, really well delivered. Yeah, we're delighted to work with Make UK on this survey, and I think what I'm most proud of is the kind of longevity of it, because we start to see the trends over many years and kind of really come to that. And I do agree with you, Peter. It's a really interesting time with the new government and the launch of the industrial strategy. What our clients are talking about is what can that really mean for them? And there is a level of optimism and skepticism. So I would say everything in this report is quite balanced around what people would like to see. We've seen a real increase in workshops between business and government, really trying to get to the heart of what are those practical things that are holding back. I would say things that come up for us with clients are regulation, energy costs, planning, timing, and kind of that real focus by region of what we can do. We're obviously a small country in the grand scheme of the globe, and as Verity says, I think there's a lot of us know that the opportunity is greater if we could sort of put those parts together and really bring that for the benefit of our manufacturers. Certainly, I can't start off my introduction without talking about the costs. Every client meeting I'm in at the minute very much focused on the costs that have come and how people mitigate those. So I do see that automation will increase. Our clients are really having to make that jump now to investing in automation. Yes, I worry about that for the jobs market, for young people coming into the jobs market, which goes to the piece around what Verity had said about apprenticeships. But I think we can get on to the practicalities with some of our guests from, as you say, the real front line of manufacturing, and I look forward to their points on those.
Thanks, Cara. You mentioned regulation. Obviously, there's been quite a lot of performative headline activity around regulation going on recently. We've had Rachel Reeves calling in the regulators and writing them letters saying do more growth. I'm just curious where your clients see lighter regulation. Where specifically can we reduce the regulatory burden? Where can we make progress on that? Yeah,
it's something we've been debating with them. I think, where people are quite focused on it is what's their competitors. So the competitors in Europe, how is that kind of affecting their product? Because of Brexit, have we got the crossover between what we have to do and what they have to do? And I think the planning, they would say also the sort of energy and regulating of how that has to be for new products is also, like, it's really interesting in this report that new products and new areas always comes up, which is fascinating to me because we all know how hard that is to go into something new and really start from that. But it does feel like people really understanding how we can simplify the form filling that people complain about. Now, you know, it's hard because clearly we do want some level of process and we want health and safety and the other things that we're, you know, very focused on in this country of doing very well. And obviously employment regulation is coming up and it feels like kind of the burden on that is going to be more. So it is a difficult area, but I think there is a simplification ask and definitely a view from our clients that they need to be competitive with Europe and not have extra burdens for doing things twice. And obviously interested in kind of what happens from the US and how that kind of focuses through on tariffs and customs and everything else. Lots in that, but it's something that I think we do need to work with government on. And I know Make UK are doing that, no doubt as we speak, as well as kind of have done over the coming months.
Yeah, we've got Trump, we've got the dreaded EU, UK reset, etc. Liam, let me come to you now. I mean, big picture, the government has said boldly it wants to have the fastest growth in G7. Thus far, when you look at that survey, what it's actually done is suppress hiring, suppress investment, you know, produce a bunch of headwinds, which, notwithstanding the optimism of these manufacturers, is clearly challenging. So how do you think, you know, if we're having this conference at the end of the Labour term, how will the government have achieved those growth ambitions? What are the levers, given that no one seems to have yet found the dreaded growth lever in number 10? What are the levers? How are you going to make it happen?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay, Peter? Yeah, great. So very happily, I'm not here to speak for the Labour government. I'm here to speak for the House of Commons Business and Trade Committee. So I think there's probably, you know, three things I would just say to follow Verity and Cara's excellent presentations and remarks. So, you know, this really is rubber hits the road time for the Labour government. So the next 6 months is really important to help ensure that government and ministers get the decisions right. We're about to publish a report on the Business and Trade Committee that basically summarises what we heard in a month-long engagement inquiry, travelling the length and breadth of the country and just listening as hard as we could to business concerns. And lots of it rhymes with the presentation that Verity so expertly set out. The thing that really struck me, though, that there's not one issue that it really is bedeviling Make UK members. There's about 18 issues. You know, this is like a really complex set of issues that we've got to try and to navigate together. But I mean, you know, it's important to hold on to the optimism that people told us about. So the four key things that people were really optimistic about were actually people generally saw the green transition as an opportunity. People saw the digital transition and AI in particular as an opportunity. People saw political stability as a big opportunity after some of the uncertainty that we've had in recent years. And people saw the industrial strategy as a really significant opportunity. So we've really just got to sort of make sure that we capitalize on those assets, if you like. The two big things the government has got to get right in the next 3 months ahead of the spending review are how the money that the government has earmarked in the budget goes into the economy, what that then means for the industrial strategy, and then crucially, what does that mean for the trade strategy? And so this is where Make UK is just going to be extremely important. And we're going to basically try and provide some space and some platforms to get this conversation as rich as we can and to help ministers get the decisions right. So on Tuesday, my committee agreed 2 new inquiries, one of which launches today, one of which will launch next week, on industrial strategy and on export-led growth. And so my kind of offer, if you like, is to to use is to kind of lean into that space as we really unpack what government has said so far, where we challenge some of the things that we're not quite sure about, but crucially where we try and sort of flush through the devil that we know is in the detail. So on industrial strategy, some of those issues are quite big. I mean, critically, the government has picked a bunch of sectors. They're good sectors. It's good to see advanced manufacturing there. But they're also the sectors where the UK already has a productivity edge. And we know that what bedevils the British economy is that long tail of underproductive firms. And so one of the questions that we want to really get stuck into is how are we going to ensure that productivity growth is really diffused through the economy in a way that isn't terrifically clear from the strategy as it's laid out. What we heard from people as we traveled around the country is that there's a few things that are really important there. Workforce absolutely came top of the list by some distance. And that's everything from how do we retrain workers whose skills are becoming out of date, through to how do we sort out the terrible apprenticeship system, through to how do we get the immigration system right? What do we do about things like IR35? There's just a kind of big labour market piece that people just thought needed really straightening out. I would say infrastructure, planning, transport was then a kind of a slew of sort of second order issues, but which nonetheless terrifically important. But then we've really got to have a conversation about how we build different kinds of institutions in our country to help make UK members' businesses flourish. That includes financial institutions. Access to finance, in particular scale-up finance, was a really significant issue that we heard a lot about. Public procurement, how should we be using government procurement to better support domestic manufacturers? And then the energy system, crucially, how do we make sure that we have energy institutions in this country that are driving energy costs down? So, you know, a lot of big things that we need the industrial strategy to get right, but crucially, what we need is a governance that allows public and private to work together, and crucially allows Whitehall to work together and the central and the local to work together. At the moment, what we heard is that so much is disjointed that it's just a complete nightmare for businesses wandering through this maze of government regulation, with a lot of big levers, frankly, just not being synchronized in the way that they were being coordinated. So that was my second point, really. A lot of work to do, frankly, on industrial strategy. Big opportunity, but a lot of work to do. And then the final piece is on trade, where we are obviously we're now setting sail for some very choppy waters. We don't yet know what President Trump is going to do when it comes to tariffs for the UK. My own reading of what's going on in Washington is that despite the ambitions of the Prime Minister, a UK-US free trade deal is pretty unlikely. That isn't a disaster, by the way, because actually US-UK trade is pretty friction-free at the moment. But there are some things that would benefit us all, things like a critical minerals deal, digital trade. You know, there are some sort of, I don't want to call them sector by sectors, but there are some bespoke agreements that would really work well. But I think amidst all of that, the best insurance policy in a more turbulent world is much more closer relationships with Europe. And we had Nick Thomas-Symonds in front of the committee together with Douglas Alexander on Tuesday. I'll publish the YouTube video a bit later on today so that people can see the evidence that we took. I think what reassured us is that Nick was very ambitious about the kind of bargain that he wants to strike with Europe. He wasn't ruling out a lot more dynamic alignment, wasn't ruling out things like mutual recognition of conformity arrangements. Obviously wanted to put a real focus on getting the SBS deal right, but actually was open to the idea that cooperation on an SBS deal could lead to much deeper cooperation in a much wider range of sectors. And I think just the geopolitical shifts that we're going through now could actually mean there's a bigger appetite in Europe to try and get a more ambitious agreement in place with the UK. And the committee is travelling to Brussels on Monday to go and see to what extent that may or may not be true. So some really useful and important data that you shared with us all today. And I guess my final word really is just a plea. It's so important that we are tightly working together over the next 3 to 6 months. The industrial strategy, the trade strategy, as they build into the comprehensive spending review, is a really, really important moment in the history of our country. And we're collectively and severally responsible for trying to do the best job and getting it right. I'll stop there, Peter.
Okay, thanks very much, Liam. I will be interested to see how you come away from your trip to Brussels. I think one of the kind of the elephants in the room, I didn't hear that ambition from Nick Thomas Simmons. I hear paper ambition, but ultimately this is a government that wants to, quote, tear down the barriers to trade, but is wedded to the same barriers, that the same red lines that created the barriers. You know, alignment doesn't get you access. And so we'll see. There's talk about PEM convention, but a lot of it is, I suspect, quite marginal. But we're going to hear.
I think PEM is off the table, and and ultimately you're right. I mean, the cage of red lines is set in the manifesto that the people voted for, and so there is only so much that the government
we
is going
shouldn't
to
kid
do
ourselves.
to depart from that.
Yeah.
But
I talked to businesses.
So I agree,
I
it's
was in a
challenging.
business in the Wirral, where that business is a chemical business, where it's going to scale its business in Europe. It won't be in the Wirral, where it would have previously been in the Wirral. And I think, anyway, let's, this is my favorite bit now. We get to talk to people who actually move things and make things. And we're going to start with, well, Claire, why don't we start with you? You've heard from Liam, you've seen the survey. I'm very struck by the issue on skills, cost headwinds, etc. I just wondered if you just start by telling us how you're experiencing the kind of the current reality.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks, Peter. So, look, I think everything there that Verity put within the presentation and that Cara's gone through, and Liam also, is absolutely resonates with us as a business and follows our challenges and our ambitions, in fact. So starting with the big one, which is cost. So we are seeing a huge increase in our costs as a business. And as you've already said, Peter, we export to over 70 countries. So one of our biggest challenges is remaining competitive. And we're seeing more competitors come into that international landscape. Europe is absolutely more challenging than it used to be. And what we're finding as a business is that challenge of balancing, what do we do about these costs? Do we pass them on? Do we absorb them? How do we tackle these costs? Versus how do we ensure that we're ring fencing the money that we'd already earmarked for investment and growth, and we're not eating into that pot, and we're not then actually, well, we wouldn't even be standing still, it would be going backwards. And that pace of change out there on an international landscape, where it feels like everybody else is moving a lot quicker than us, actually. And so the challenge that we're facing is exactly that: is how do we make sure that we don't end up in actually a price war? We don't want to be in this fight on an international level of just competing on price. So that's probably the biggest challenge. And then alongside that, you mentioned on the skills. So the other big area, of course, is the skills gap, and they actually go hand in hand. I believe in that there are some fundamental avenues that we want to explore for growth where we don't have the skills today within the business, and therefore we need to bring those skills in, and that needs to could come in the form of apprenticeships, could come in the form of training, comes in the form of collaboration with other institutions, and I can talk a bit more about some of the things we're doing if it's of interest. But upskilling, so there's this balance between upskilling existing employees. We've already touched a little bit on automation, and I can talk more about what we're doing on that. But in terms of that sort of hire versus automate versus upskill versus recruit, these are aspects that we are very focused on this year. And for us, actually, we'll be putting a much bigger focus on upskilling existing workforce to give us better flexibility, being able to move people around the business easier. And bringing that much needed knowledge. Mostly for us, it's digitalization and starting on that AI journey.
Claire, is your business a levy payer?
Yes, we are, sadly.
So I think obviously that those Verity mentioned just how low, and obviously we're in transition from one levy to another. But actually, since the levy came in, if you look at the data, spending on training among businesses UK wide, has really, really fallen. So what do you expect or hope? Do you spend all your levy, is my first question. The second thing is, if not, why not? And the third thing is, what do you hope from the levy flex that is allegedly on offer. We'll see how much flex there is. What do you hope from that in terms of addressing the skills needs that you talked about?
Yeah, sure. So we are a levy payer. We do use all of our levy today. So I think the thing that it doesn't give me right now is flexibility. So where I want to upskill the workforce, so existing employees that perhaps have been within the business, and some of my employees have been in the business 30 years, you know, that's the world of manufacturing. So to have that flexibility to upskill and to use funding that today is there in the apprenticeship levy means that if that's the way it continues going forward, then I won't have any flexibility around funding that upskilling that I want to do. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for my funds to not expire after 2 years, as it were. And part of the reason for that is because some of the education funding that I might want to look at is quite expensive, perhaps, in some areas. So I might want to collect a little bit more money to put towards that, but also to have that flexibility to choose training and upskilling over just the apprenticeship side is an important.
I mean, the expiry date is in there to make you spend, isn't it? I mean,
it is.
UK business doesn't invest enough in training. If you look at the numbers compared to OECD countries, we are perennial underinvestors in training. And I constantly talk to businesses who complain they don't get enough, but actually they don't invest enough. Is that because, I'm not saying your business, is that because you fear you're not going to get a big enough return on your investment because the environment? Is that because it's too complicated to invest in training? Why is it so hard?
Well, I think there's two types of training. There's training to keep people up to date with their current skills, and then there's training of new skills. So, you know, first of all, training for people in really key areas like the health and safety, like the use of machinery, all of those sorts of things that you need to keep them up to date with, you know, for obvious reasons. They'll always take priority, certainly within our business, over investing in bringing completely new skills. But I think that the investing in new skills that underpins your strategy of what you want to do for growth. So, you know, when I'm looking at, okay, this year I want to invest in training because I want to bring in automation and start a lot more on digitalization within business, I need to look at how I can bring those skills into the business. So now is the time that I would look to invest in that training. Investing in it 2 years ago, you could argue, well, if I'd have done that, maybe I'd have been a bit further forward. But if the strategy isn't there to, you know, to work together with the training needs, then so I think that's a big part of it is companies will invest when they need it, not beforehand.
Because part of the discussion, isn't it, is actually they don't want you to spend the levy on keeping people's certificates up to date to use machines, right? They actually want you to, from a productivity point of view, they want you to spend the money on the additional skills that are going to make you more productive and more dynamic, etc. But I mean, that is, I guess, it's what Skills England is mulling over at the moment when we see.
But there's also the challenge of bringing apprentices in. So we have three apprentices within our business. One of the big challenges that we have as a business is to retain them within the business after they've completed their apprenticeship. So they're young, they're starting out on their careers, they're learning skills that exist today within the business. You know, it's important that we can support them within their education journey. And then we get to the end of that apprenticeship, and our ambition, of course, is that all that investment we've made is that they will stay within the business. But, you know, more and more, and I think we'll see this more with the next generation as they're coming through, is that desire to just stay. They want to go out and experience, and who wouldn't? So it's a big commitment for a business. And now I feel that actually, are we, with the apprenticeships, for me, it's more about investing in bringing new skills into our sector, and my responsibility as an MD to play my part in doing that for the greater good, rather than the direct benefit for my business, you know, at this moment in time.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating discussion. I'm going to bring in Alex now. Alex, I guess we've done skills. What do you want or expect or hope from the industrial strategy that will help you grow your business, grow your exporting? I mean, there's a range of policy levers. They talk about access to finance, easier regulation. I'm curious where you hope and expect. Alex, you're still with us, I take it. I can't see you on the...
Yes, I'm right here.
You're right here. Here he is. I think we've done a good hit on skills there and the complexities around skills. Where else are your challenges, and where are your expectations or hopes for growth?
Yeah, and just to clarify, I appreciate the confusion with my accent, but Vernacare
You're a
International
UK company.
It's okay. It's a proud UK manufacturer owned company that goes all the way back to the Crimean War when we were making wound care dressings for British troops in the 1840s, and we now have a diverse portfolio of medical products and infection prevention, surgical call points like women's health, and also we protect healthcare professionals from needle stick injuries with our clinical waste management products. So we've got 5 factories throughout the UK, 2 in Wales, 1 in Nottinghamshire, and 2 in the Northwest in Bolton and Chorley. We employ about 550 employees, mainly here in the UK. We shut our 6th plant that was in China over the last year and reshored that production capability into 2 of our plants in the UK, and we were able to do that on a cost neutral basis, which we're very proud of, that we see is core to our growth strategy to not only service the needs of our UK healthcare businesses, but also we're a big exporter into Europe, and we want and need to grow into the US. Just to reinforce the increases in costs and national insurance and the successive increases in mandatory minimum wage, not just with this government, but the prior, is a challenge, right? It is a challenge. It's gonna, as we're doing our budgeting right now, we're in the middle of budgeting for next financial year. Our ability as a company to increase the wages of most of the employees who are not under mandatory living wage is going to be challenged going forward. We're not going to be able to increase as much as we'd like, and that's going to be a hard message to the employee base that I'm concerned about, but I don't think we have a choice. With the NHS as our single largest customer, we can't just pass on price increases, right, as easily to that sector. So, I would just urge, Liam and the government to continue to pass that message along on behalf of all the members of Make UK, that please limit future taxation and mandatory increases, because we must be competitive globally. UK has so much to offer, and we need to continue to be have a competitive cost basis in order to compete with countries like China, who import here into the UK, but also we compete with globally, who pay lower wages, right? So it's basic stuff, but I would urge.
Alex, you're never going to compete with China on wages, but you just said that you reshored which is encouraging in a competitive fashion. I wonder whether I could. You mentioned, you want to grow your exports to the US. You want to, as Liam said, looks unlikely, to be honest, there's going to be a full fat trade deal with the US. But as Liam also says, UK trade with the US has been growing quite merrily without a formal trade deal. When you look at the US and the EU as 2 markets, what do you want and hope to see that will help you grow those markets in a cost-effective way?
Yeah, we even before we start to talk about what could be a pending tariff escalation between the US and the UK and potentially the EU, there was an article a week ago about how the EU is looking at some sort of predatory practices from China with medical devices, which is the business that we compete with. So we're obviously watching those dynamics carefully. But even in absence of emerging tariff policy, we see that because we're a UK manufacturer that can deliver high quality, we meet all the stiff regulatory standards of being a medical device manufacturer. And in a post-COVID world, right, we can offer supply chain resiliency, right? The Atlantic is closer to the US than coming over the Pacific. There is a heck of a lot of disruption from freight and trade that we can offer not just healthcare customers in the UK, but in Europe and the US that that we see that we can benefit because we manufacture things here, and we have better control of our quality, and we're closer to our customer base. As you talk about potential pending tariff barriers, suddenly can the UK, as a manufacturer, become a more reliable and lower cost exporter? So we're exploring very aggressively discussions with both existing international distributors and customers as well as new ones.
Interesting. Liam, can I bring you back in here? I mean, you hear evidence in your committee, but you've heard from two manufacturers there. What do you hear that concerns you, and where do you think the government can help them? And where?
So I think the key thing that we hear from businesses is, where's the growth coming from? For lots of reasons, we understand the inheritance, we understand foundations needing fixing, we understand difficult decisions, we get all of that. But employment costs are going up, energy costs aren't coming down, employment rights bills coming in, minimum wage is going up, and there's, mixed levels of sympathy for all of that thing. But the point people make is that we can deal with this if we can have a growth plan alongside it. And right now, we're not seeing enough clarity on what that growth plan looks like. And so, the comprehensive spending reviews are like a really important moment. And the work ahead of that is really important, because people just don't have a clear enough story about where the growth is, and people can see the risk going up. And I think, if you're sitting on global boards right now, you'll have a range of opinions about what is going on in the White House, but I suspect you've also got a hunch that there is going to be a bunch of deficit-funded tax breaks in the United States, and a lot of global boards are going to be, looking at the UK, Europe, and the US, and taking decisions that right now it might make more sense to put the investment into the United States rather than
as they did with the Inflation Reduction Act, actually.
As they did with the Inflation Reduction Act. So, I think that's going to be, that is going to be a real challenge. And so I think, where does that leave me? I mean, that leaves me with, we need a much clearer story about optimism, the strength of our fundamentals, and the growth of the future. We need real clarity about a growth plan. We need to be able to de-risk the stability and the persistence and the durability of that growth plan, so that it becomes something that you can predict and forecast for 5 years at least in advance, if not 10. And people, need to see progress on that European bargain.
Just briefly, you mentioned about the long tail, and I think there's an issue with UK businesses. But at the same time, we're fiscally constrained, and there's a danger, isn't there, that this becomes an exercise in jam spreading. There's 8 sectors. The green paper on the industrial strategy talks about temporary government catalytic support for sectors, and there was a report out from the Centre for Cities this week. Other think tanks are available, but looking at how concentrated actually the growth opportunities are in the South East, London, and the greater South East. And there's a tension, isn't there, between jam spreading and trying to diffuse productivity throughout the economy, and the need to get growth going now, and the need to invest in places that do have high productivity, often based around exporting services and high value manufacturing. So how do you think that tension gets resolved? Particularly when someone said to me in Whitehall, basically, unless you're going to build tanks or windmills, there's no money. What do you think the strategy should be? Because you're going to have to disappoint some people, aren't you, along the way?
So I can see the theoretical argument that would lead you to that conclusion, but I disagree with it for a couple of reasons. So the first is that investment in infrastructure and supply side reform around planning is a big deal that is going to take down cost, and is going to take down risk, and is going to dial up speed. And that is a set of reforms that will benefit the lion's share of the business community. So that's the first thing. Second, we have got to make progress in reforming our financial institutions. I mean, I am very struck that people we talk to in some of the biggest banks that bank the UK business community are just not seeing people step forward and asking for finance. So there is the banks would say, to a degree they always say this, but the banks would say that there is a deficit of projects right now. And so we've got to just look at whether the financial institutions are kind of in the right place and whether the financial institutions could be better productivity spreaders. There's actually an interesting conversation to have with the accountants in our country as well about what kind of vector they might be able to provide. But the last two big institutions that could make a difference are, one, government procurement. Government procurement at the moment is badly organised and does a very poor job at supporting small and medium-sized firms. And our universities have been not something we've necessarily talked about a lot today, but we need an explosion of knowledge transfer partnerships. We need to weave a completely different web between our university system and our small and business system, our small and medium business community. And I know this is an old trope.
Do you think universities are cognizant of that, particularly as they come under cost
I think
pressures?
some are. I think some are. I mean, I like many people have made the trip to Germany to go and understand Fraunhofer's and the German system. And the thing that has always struck me is the way in which they say, look, we're the R&D department for the Mittelstand. That is exactly how they see themselves. And, we've got some terrific universities. Warwick is a good example. Sheffield's a good example. What University of Manchester are doing is pretty spectacular at the moment. So I think you have got some universities that really do get it. But the question that I ask is, well, where is the government pressure on universities everywhere to behave in a way that is productivity enhancing? So I think, you asked me at the top of this conversation, what are the levers? I think there are some pretty big levers actually, but they need to be kind of moved in concert, and we need to see a hell of a lot more specificity as to how we're going to deploy them.
Okay, Claire, let me come in on that one.
Yeah, so thanks, Liam. I think that I just wanted to comment and specifically focus in on the KTP, the university aspect that you touched on there. I believe the knowledge transfer partnership is probably one of the best kept secrets out there, which is a crying shame. We are, in terms of looking at our growth agenda, so for all the things that Peter, you asked me about the challenges, but actually looking at, we're very optimistic. We remain optimistic. I think you've got to have the energy and drive at times like this to be optimistic. And part of that is looking for those growth objectives. And for us, one of those is very much around innovation. And it's that creativity of how can we do things different. And one of the aspects we're looking at is actually a completely transformation of our potentially our business model. We're looking at servitization. These are things that we just don't have the knowledge. So it was very natural for us to reach out to the academic institutes, and for us in this case it's Aston University. It's right on our doorstep as we're based in Birmingham. We've got a fabulous KTP program, and so we're very excited by that. But and even though we don't qualify as an SME, sadly, we for various reasons I won't go into, but we still qualify for government funding under that scheme, which I think is a really positive thing. What I would say, though, is that those programs take time. So there is a level of investment, and it's the same with things like AI and digitalization. It's an investment ahead of time before realization of the gains, the revenue gains and the profits.
Speculate to accumulate, and obviously when cost pressures are tight, it's hard to do that. Alex, I'm going to bring you in now, but I'm also going to chuck in a couple of questions, which I think which have come in from listeners and actually touch on lots of things that we've also touched on. So I'm going to read these out, and then maybe you can also talk across these, and other panelists can come in. The first one is, we need to take advantage of new digital technologies. Everyone's talking about AI, etc. But how can companies do that when they aren't sitting on cash because of energy costs? And fixing energy costs, we know, is a long-term problem. You can build more windmills and more nuclear power stations, but that ain't going to happen overnight. The second one is, industry says that the education system isn't delivering what it needs, but what's the balance between ensuring the next generation have a broad range of skills, as Claire was talking about, and knowledge, but also the specialist skills that business needs. Are we getting enough specialist skills? Alex, take either one of both of those and come back on some of the things you've heard from Liam and Claire.
I think it's a great call. We aren't getting enough specialist skills, and at Vernacare, what we're finding is a gap, particularly in the Northwest, where we're trying to hire roles in more specialist or science-based fields, whether or not it's R&D, whether or not it's IT, and particularly in the healthcare space from a regulatory standpoint, we have a gap in the available workforce. So we end up having sponsoring immigrant visas and so forth for a number of those roles. That should change. We should be investing not just at an apprenticeship level, which we don't take full advantage of, unfortunately, but more in some of these specialist roles. So I fully agree.
Why? Good question, right? So there you are. You've got a skills deficit. We have these LSIPs, local skills improvement plans. I don't know if you've engaged with that or local government. Why do you underspend your levy if presumably you do, from what you've just said? Why is that?
Peter, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I don't know the answer to that, and I should.
Oh, okay. I mean, it's a very common, I mean, the levy is underspent. I hear lots of different reasons, but I'm always curious. So when you're local up in the Northwest, do you go to the local FE college? Do you go to the local to the devolved government, to the mayor? What are you doing to try and address those skills deficits you talk about?
I think it's a gap. It's something that we need to develop a plan for, and we haven't fully thought about that plan. What we have done, we have taken advantage of the KTP projects, and in our case at the University of Manchester, we've got an active KTP that's just kicked off to partner with the Royce Institute to improve the sustainability of plastics in healthcare, which we are a producer of. So I just wanted to shout out that we do feel like we're partnering very well with government funding in that field.
Yeah. Cara, I'm going to bring you in here, and I'm going to throw you another of the questions, which I think is actually quite a good one for you, because I suspect that you probably have clients asking this question, which is that joining the dots and awareness of support is by far one of the biggest challenges manufacturing businesses face. Actually not knowing, to Alex's point just now, where you do go to address your skills deficit, where you do go to get support that is available from local government, etc. How do you think, this is the question, how do you envisage the industrial strategy can counter this challenge?
Yeah, no, I think, Peter, that's definitely something we've been talking about with our clients when we've brought them together with the government in our workshops around the industrial strategy, and really seeing a kind of piece about how do you bring that ecosystem together. And actually, one of the reasons I stuck my hand up for the last piece, and actually it links very well into this, thankfully, is that, I was up in Cambridge this week with some amazing startup scale-ups. Now, to Liam's point, they're finding it really hard to get funding. It's been a really tough market in the funding world, but actually what they do have is international customers, and they're finding it really hard to get into UK customers. So one of them said to me this week, I actually would love a UK customer. I've got international, and that's around AI and around, how you do calibration in engineering, how you're looking at productivity, cost management with AI. So I think bring those ecosystems together so that our manufacturers know where they can get to. And I think this is a really interesting piece around what we're talking about with the university scale-ups and I certainly find it an immense privilege of my role to link people up each week, and Verity's helped me with that and Make UK, as has Stephen, over the years of how do we find the right things. But yes, with everybody's help, we need to have that as an ecosystem that works easily for people.
Just to clarify, where are they struggling to get funding? Is that about getting UKRI grants, government funding, or is it about funding from the market, or is it where's the struggle? Because sometimes you hear people are awash with funding for and then you hear people, pension funds, etc., saying, we've got 2 billion, we don't know where to put it.
I think sometimes there can be a whole load of funds. Let's take decarbonisation, for example. Now, when you're a policy geek like me, you like to map out all the funds and programmes and reliefs that are available. And if you take everything under like decarbonisation, it's massive. But then if you start to look at then criteria, you begin to see a lot of companies fall through the gaps. So on like the decarb agenda, for example, you could be a mid-sized company who's not probably defined as quite energy intensive, but it is still quite mildly energy intensive, let's make up some terms, and then you can't always access the funds. So I think almost kind of then pivoting back to the other question about how do we invest in like automation and CapEx when there's energy costs, well actually we could start by helping companies with their energy costs in terms of energy efficiency. The one like upfront grant that we had, the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund, made its way sort of quietly out of the spending review phase 1. So actually for a lot of companies there are like 0 funds or reliefs on things like energy efficiency. So if government isn't going to help there, then we are probably going to have to go a bit bigger on energy costs. You've got your commodity and your non-commodity costs. On your non-commodity costs, you've got a whole host of government levies. If you wanted to go big and ambitious and actually help companies like Claire and Alex's in reducing energy costs, you could think about reducing or even scrapping some of those levies. So I do think there are things that government could genuinely do to stimulate growth, and you'll see that investment in automation, you'll see those increased productivity gains, and you probably won't hear the kind of moans and groans when you do make changes to things like NIC's contributions.
Right, there's an interesting challenge. Although the levies are there to try and drive the transition, aren't they? But anyway, let's not go down the green rabbit hole. Just we're going to bring in Claire very quickly because we've only got 2 minutes left. Such a good conversation. We've run out of time. A comment on the apprenticeship levy. We can't spend our levy as we do not meet the requirements to comply with criteria for that levy, as we will not meet the endpoint assessment criteria. So that, I mean, there is quite a lot of dropout, isn't there, from apprentices? Anyway, Claire, short last word, and then I'm going to, if anyone wants a quick final word, there might be 30 seconds for that. Right, Claire.
So very quickly then, just following on from Verity's comments there, as a business owner, it is a minefield, especially as we're a group-owned business. We operate as an SME, we're owned as part of a big group. Trying to find and figure out what is available to us and for what we qualify for is such hard work. Talking about AI, the government's got so much information on us. I think putting something in there, AI, where somebody, a computer comes to me and says, hey, Claire, did you know you actually could qualify for all of this, and point me in the right direction, and overly simplifying it for me would be wonderful.
Ask the bot, ask ChatGPT-4, where can I get a grant for? Probably it won't be long before it can do that.
So I did do a bit of that. I tried a bit of that, and some of it was useful, but it's still really hard work to navigate it.
Right, we're into our final minute. Who wants the final word? Alex, you're off mute and you run a proper business, so I think I want to hear from you.
Listen, I would just say, while of course it's about policy, right, and the industrial strategy, it also, growth needs to come from our attitude. We need to develop that story as a country and speak with energy and confidence about why the UK is a tremendous place to invest. We've got to believe it. It's got to be authentic, but we've got a lot to talk about, government stability, lower inflation, research and innovation in the world's greatest universities. We're at the vanguard of innovating and sustainability. Let's put together that story and start talking about it with confidence. It's as much about attitude, and I think we need a boost.
Right. I mean, what a brilliant place to end. I picked up something that Liam was saying about the need for a narrative. We've had years of uncertainty. We've had pinball policy making. Now, as I think Liam also said, we need a narrative. We need to, crack on. Ask not what the government can do for us, but what we can do for ourselves. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I do recommend looking at the survey. It's a very good and useful piece of work. And I'm sure there'll be many more conversations like this to come as we see the industrial strategy roll out. So I think that our time is up, but thank you very much for joining.